The sounds had been there for 3 nights before Eris Calder admitted they were not the house. Houses settle. She knew that. 50 years of living inside old wood and plaster had taught her the vocabulary of a building's private life, the low tick of pipes contracting in cold air, the soft groan of joists absorbing a shift in weight, the intermittent percussion of a shutter that needed its pin replaced. She had lived in 4 houses, and she knew their sounds the way she knew her own breathing. She did not startle at buildings, but this was not the house. This was something above the house, above the low plaster ceiling of her bedroom, above the insulation she had been told was inadequate by the home inspector and had not yet gotten around to replacing, above everything she could see or account for. Something moved up there in a pattern that had no logic she could assign to structure or weather. It started, always, at 20 minutes past 2 in the morning. She had checked the clock each time with the brisk precision of a woman who does not indulge mystery but does believe in documentation. 20 past 2, a sound like the deliberate placing of a foot, then stillness, then the sound again, further along, toward the east wall, then stillness again, longer. Then, on the second night, something that was almost, but she told herself could not be, a voice. Not a human voice, lower than that, older than that, the kind of sound that seems to come from a different temperature entirely. She told herself, pipe vibration. She told herself, raccoon. She told herself, Vermont is full of creatures that find their way into old eaves, and this house had been empty for 11 months before she arrived, and 11 months is more than enough time for something to establish a residence. She made a note to call pest control in the morning. She did not call pest control in the morning. She made a second note on the second morning. On the third night, at 20 minutes past 2, the sound came again, and then stopped. And then, after a silence long enough that she had almost managed to fold it back into sleep, there was a single sound from directly above her head. Not movement, not vibration. A knock. 3 times, spaced, patient. Eris sat up in bed. She was 68 years old. She had moved to Maple Hollow, Vermont, 8 weeks ago, in the last week of September, when the maples had still been holding their color, but the light had already taken on the gray quality of a season letting go. She had moved here because the lease on her apartment in Concord had ended the same month her last consulting contract did, and because a colleague had mentioned a house for sale at a price that made sense, and because she had looked at the number in her savings account and the number of years she could reasonably expect to spend them in, and had concluded that the calculation favored a place with low property taxes and little demand on her time. She had not moved here for community. She had not moved here for a new chapter or a fresh start or any of the other phrases that people attach to the relocation of older women as though the move were a form of therapy. She had moved here because the numbers worked. That was the whole of it. The house was a 1910 colonial on Birch Street, white clapboard, green shutters, a front porch that tilted slightly north, and a back garden that had gone to seed in a way she found restful rather than neglected. It had an attic she had not yet opened. The door to it was in the upstairs hallway, a narrow, pull-down stair, the kind with the wooden handle worn smooth by decades of hands. She had noted it on her first walk-through and had assigned it to the category of things she would get to eventually, meaning things she saw no urgency in confronting. She had been wrong about the urgency. She got out of bed. The hallway was cold in the way that Vermont hallways are cold in late October. Not aggressively cold, not the cold of a broken furnace, but the particular chill that seeps through old walls and settles on the floor like something patient and deliberate. She had slept in wool socks since her second night in the house. She stood in the hallway in those socks and her flannel nightgown, and she looked at the attic door. The wooden handle hung at the end of its cord in the dark. She was not afraid. She was clear about this, internally. She was not a woman who was afraid of attics. She was a woman who was annoyed that something in her attic had knocked on her ceiling at 20 minutes past 2 in the morning for 3 consecutive nights, and that she had spent those 3 nights making notes instead of investigating, which was not characteristic. She pulled the cord. The stair descended with the particular sound of a mechanism that has not been used in some time, a dry, reluctant unfolding, a soft complaint from the hinges. She reached back to the hall table for her flashlight. It was a good flashlight, practical, the kind designed for power outages rather than atmosphere. She clicked it on and went up. The attic was not large. The pitch of the roof allowed her to stand upright only along the center spine, and she moved carefully, flashlight sweeping. Dust, a good deal of it, the kind of dust that has been allowed to settle over years and become part of the architecture. Cardboard boxes in 2 stacks near the east wall, sealed with tape that had yellowed and partially lifted at the corners. A wooden chair with a broken rung, draped with a sheet. A steamer trunk, locked. An old mirror, face down on a pair of sawhorses. The smell of the place was particular and dense, dry wood, old fabric, something faintly sweet underneath that she could not identify. She moved the flashlight slowly along the floor. It crossed something that moved. She stopped, moved the beam back. He was sitting in the space between the steamer trunk and the east wall, which was the farthest corner of the attic from the stair, not pressed against the wall, not hiding. Simply positioned in that corner with the contained, deliberate quality of something that has chosen its location and sees no reason to explain the choice. A cat. Large, she could see that even in the flashlight beam, substantial through the chest and shoulders, with fur the color of old smoke, a deep gray that in the direct light showed faint, darker stripes beneath, like wood grain seen through water. His eyes, when the beam caught them, were a pale amber that she had only ever seen before in certain kinds of old glass. He did not move. He did not blink. Or rather, he blinked once, slowly, and then resumed his stillness with the patience of something that had been still for much longer than the last few minutes, and would remain still for considerably longer still, if that was what the situation required. He was not afraid. He was not threatening. He was simply there, in his corner, watching her, as though her arrival were an event he had been informed of and was prepared to accommodate. Eris held the flashlight steady. She was aware, with the clarity that 3 in the morning provides, of several things simultaneously. First, that there was a cat in her attic who was not behaving like any cat she had ever encountered in the context of a surprise. Most animals, encountered unexpectedly in an enclosed space, did something, fled, or hissed, or performed some version of alarm that acknowledged the mutual disruption. This one had done none of those things. He had simply looked at her, and then continued to exist in his corner with an equanimity that was, she had to admit, slightly unnerving. Second, that the objects behind him were not random. She had almost missed them in her focus on the animal. But now, with the flashlight angled past him, she could see them arranged against the base of the wall behind the steamer trunk in a row that was too neat, too particular to be accidental. A length of blue ribbon, faded to the color of old sky, coiled with care rather than left as ribbon tends to be left when it is simply abandoned. A square of floral fabric, folded. A child's wool glove, single, the right hand, in a pale green that had dulled with age. And a picture frame, small, wooden, without its glass, propped upright against the wall, facing outward. Empty. She stood very still. He watched her. There was nothing threatening in the arrangement. There was nothing explicable in it either. What there was, and she stood in the cold attic at 3 in the morning and let herself think the word, was intention. Whatever was in that corner had not been left there. It had been placed. She looked at the cat. The cat looked at her. "How long have you been here?" she said. It was not a question she expected an answer to. It was simply the thing that came out, in the way that things come out at 3 in the morning in an attic in Vermont, when the situation has exceeded the available vocabulary. He blinked again. She went back downstairs. In the morning, she put a bowl of water and a small amount of tuna at the top of the attic stairs and retreated. She did this not because she had made a decision about the cat, but because tuna was the only protein in the apartment without a plan attached to it, and it seemed the practical response to the presence of a living creature that might be hungry. She was not going to name him. She was not going to make this into something. She went downstairs and made coffee and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the back garden, where the last of the asters had gone to brown seed heads and the mountain ash at the back corner had dropped most of its leaves, leaving the orange berry clusters brilliant and strange against the grey November sky. Maple Hollow in late October was not as picturesque as the name suggested. The village had a general store, a post office that operated out of the back of the general store, a white-painted congregational church, and a diner on the main road that was open for breakfast and lunch only. The nearest grocery was 11 miles south. The nearest neighbor she had spoken to was a woman named Patience Orrell, who lived in the Yellow Cape 2 doors down, and who had appeared at her door with a loaf of zucchini bread in the first week, with the frank, unapologetic friendliness of someone who has lived in a small place long enough to know that new people benefit from an introduction whether they want one or not. Eris had thanked her for the bread, which was good. She had not encouraged further contact because she had not moved to Maple Hollow for contact. The cat had eaten all of the tuna by noon. She knew because she checked. She told herself she was checking to assess whether there was an animal in her attic that required food, which was a practical matter, not a personal one. She put more tuna up that evening, and water, and, because the nights had gotten cold enough that she could feel the drop through the floor of the upstairs hallway, an old wool blanket she found in the steamer trunk that smelled of cedar and someone's past. She did not go back up for 4 days. She heard him, sometimes, the careful footsteps above her bed, the particular silence of something that was aware it was being listened for and was conducting itself accordingly. But she did not go up. She told herself she was giving the animal space to settle. She was aware, under that explanation, of a different truth. She did not know what she would do with him if she went up. She did not know what the next step was, and she did not move toward next steps when she could not see them clearly. On the 5th day, she called a veterinarian. The practice was in the town of Harwick, 9 miles east, which was the nearest town with a full veterinary office rather than a mobile farm vet. The receptionist, who introduced herself as June without offering a last name, was cheerful in the specific way of people whose job requires them to discuss distressed animals all day and who have developed warmth as a professional infrastructure. "I have a cat," Eris said, "in my attic. I need to know how to get him to a vet without—" She paused. She was not sure how to complete the sentence. "Without making it worse. Without committing to something I haven't decided. Without stressing him," June supplied helpfully. "Yes," Eris said, accepting this version. June walked her through a process involving a carrier with an old T-shirt inside it for scent familiarity and a can of food placed near rather than inside the carrier. The approach was patient and particular, and Eris wrote it down in the notebook she kept by the phone, which was a yellow legal pad she had been using for 11 years and had not yet considered replacing. She put the carrier at the top of the attic stairs that afternoon, with the door open and the T-shirt she no longer wore inside it, and a small dish of the tuna beside the carrier. She did not wait by the stair. She went to bed. At 20 minutes past 2 in the morning, she heard no footsteps. At 2:30, she heard him moving. Deliberate, a different pattern than usual. Not the east wall traverse, but something more centralized, something that traced the middle of the attic floor. Then quiet. Then, very faintly, the metallic sound of a carrier door. In the morning, he was inside it, sitting upright, not curled, with the composed quality of something that had made a considered decision and was prepared to see it through. She drove him to Harwick. The veterinarian was a man named Dr. Halvern Sloane, which was a name she felt belonged more properly to a 19th-century novel than to a veterinary practice in Vermont, and she said so briefly in the waiting room when he introduced himself, and he looked at her with the expression of a man who has heard this before and continues to find it only mildly irritating. He was 60, perhaps, with a careful manner and the specific attentiveness of a professional who has learned to read what an animal cannot say. He examined the cat on the table for a long time without speaking. Eris stood near the window and watched. The cat, and she had told herself she was not going to call him anything but the cat, allowed the examination with the same composed quality he had shown in the attic and in the carrier and in the car, which was to say, he was present without being cooperative or uncooperative, existing through the examination as a fact rather than an experience. Dr. Sloane ran his hands along the cat's spine. He looked at his teeth. He checked the ears. He pressed gently along the abdomen. He looked at the paws with more attention than she expected, holding each one and examining the pads for longer than seemed standard. Then he put on the stethoscope and listened. The quiet in the room extended. "He is not a young cat," Dr. Sloane said. He did not say this the way vets sometimes say things about age, with the particular soft preparation of someone about to deliver difficulty. He said it factually, as an observation. "How old?" Eris said. 11, 12, could be 13. He straightened and set the stethoscope aside. He looked at the cat, who looked back at him with the amber eyes. His health is actually reasonable, given dehydration, some, but not severe. Underweight. Joints are showing age. He paused. His coat has been maintained. Maintained, Eris repeated. He has been grooming himself consistently. Over a long period. Dr. Sloan moved to his notes. There's no evidence of recent trauma, no injuries consistent with a difficult entry into the space. He has been in an enclosed, dry environment for some time. How long is some time? Eris said. Dr. Sloan set his pen down. He looked at her with the directness of a man who has decided that softening an answer serves no one. Years, he said. Not months. Years. The word landed in the room and did not move. Eris looked at the cat on the examination table. He was sitting up straight, looking at the window, not through it with the desperate attention of something trapped, but at it, the way you look at a view you have memorized and continue to find worth memorizing. If he's been in there for years, she said, then no one came for him, Dr. Sloan said, carefully. Yes, that would appear to be correct. She was quiet. Or someone couldn't, he added, with the even tone of a man who has seen enough to know that the space between those two options contains most of the difficult stories. She drove back to Maple Hollow with the cat in the carrier in the back seat, and she did not put the radio on, and she did not think about what she was going to do next, because she needed to drive carefully on the mountain road and because she was not ready to think about what she was going to do next. She put him back in the attic. She did this not because she did not intend to deal with the situation, but because the situation had become, in the space of one veterinary visit, considerably larger than she had anticipated, and she required time to think about it without also managing an animal in her living space who had not yet been invited into her living space and whose preferences on the matter were entirely unclear. She brought the food up. She changed the water. She had purchased, at the veterinary reception desk, a bag of senior dry food and a small supply of prescription wet food formulated for mature cats with joint concerns. She had done this efficiently, without comment, and had not thought too hard about what it meant. Back in her kitchen, she made a cup of tea in the mug with the small chip on the handle that she had bought at a yard sale in Concord in 1987 and carried through every subsequent move because the chip made it hers and because she had never been someone who discarded things simply because they had been damaged. She sat with the tea and her yellow legal pad, and she wrote, in the organized way she approached problems that required thinking. What I know, cat. Male, approximately 12 years old. Living in attic for minimum 2 years, possibly longer. Good health relative to circumstances. Objects arranged near his position. Ribbon, fabric, glove, empty picture frame. Previous tenant of house, unknown. House empty 11 months before my arrival. She put the pen down. She added after a moment, the objects are not his. He can't have brought them from somewhere else. He couldn't have entered from outside and accumulated objects over time. The attic vents were all screened. Dr. Sloan had confirmed that nothing about his condition suggested outdoor exposure. Whatever was in that corner had been there when he arrived, or he had arranged what was already there. She wrote, he arranged what was already there. She sat with that for a while. Then she wrote, why? Then she closed the legal pad, because there was no answer to that on a legal pad, and she was not going to manufacture one. No. She went to the Congregational Church on a Tuesday morning, which was not a day she would normally choose for a church, and which was also not a day she would normally choose for anything social, but the church had a notice on its board about a weekly morning gathering. Coffee, conversation, open to all, and she had decided the night before, with the brisk practicality she applied to research tasks, that the most efficient way to learn about the history of a house was to find the people who had been living near it for a long time. The gathering was in the church hall behind the sanctuary, which smelled of old wood and coffee that had been sitting on a burner too long, and underneath those things, something floral she eventually traced to a vase of dried hydrangeas on the windowsill. 8 people were there, all women except for a man named Gerald, who was 91 and appeared to be sleeping in his chair, though he responded to questions with sufficient accuracy to make this uncertain. Eris sat with a paper cup of the dark, overcooked coffee and listened more than she spoke, which was her preferred method in rooms she did not know. She said she had bought the house on Birch Street. This produced a short, particular silence around the table, the kind of silence that is full rather than empty. And then two women began speaking at once and then deferred to each other, and then the older one, Vera, who had white hair cut short and a directness that Eris found refreshing, said, "Marlowe Dren's house." "I didn't know the previous owner," Eris said. "She didn't sell it," Vera said. "Her family did, after she went to Linden Grove." "What is Linden Grove?" "The care center on Route 9, said the other woman, whose name was apparently Bertie and who wore a fleece vest over what appeared to be a second fleece vest, a layering strategy Eris had begun to appreciate as the Vermont weather made its intentions clear. "She's been there about 2 years now, maybe 2.5. 2 years?" Eris thought of Dr. Sloane's voice. "Years, not months, years. She was here her whole life," Vera said, "born in that house. Never left except for her teaching years, and then she came back." She paused. "Always had a cat." "Always. One cat," Eris said. "One at a time," Bertie said. "She was devoted to them, talked about them like—" She glanced at Vera. "Like people," Vera said without apology. "She did. And the last one—" She stopped. She turned her cup in her hands. "After she left, we all assumed he'd been taken somewhere, rehomed, but nobody actually knew." She set the cup down. "There was some difficulty at the end, with her family. They were quick about the house. We didn't ask enough questions." Eris drove home on the mountain road, with the windows up against the November cold, and she thought about a woman who had been born in a house and never fully left it, and about a cat who had apparently decided the same was true of him. That afternoon, she went back to the attic. She did not bring food this time. She simply went up and sat down on the floor near the center of the space, where the roof pitch allowed it, with her back against one of the structural posts and her legs out in front of her, and the attic's particular smell settling around her like something patient and accumulated. He was in his corner, as always. He watched her sit down. She looked at the objects. In the daylight from the small gable window, they were clearer. The blue ribbon was silk, or had been, a good quality, the kind used in gift wrapping decades ago, before ribbon became plastic. The floral fabric was cotton, a blue and white pattern of small flowers that she did not recognize but that felt like something from the mid-century, a house dress or an apron or a curtain. The green glove was wool, child-sized, with a small wooden button at the cuff. The picture frame was pine, painted white, the paint chipped at the corners, sized for something wallet-sized or slightly larger. They were arranged in a line along the wall, evenly spaced. She looked at the cat. He watched her look at the objects. Then he did something she had not seen him do before. He stood, slowly, with the deliberate care of a creature whose joints make movement a considered proposition, and he walked 3 steps along the wall toward the ribbon. He sat down. He placed his right front paw over the ribbon, not pressing down, not claiming it aggressively, simply resting there, as if to indicate. She waited. He looked at her. He removed his paw. He walked back to his original position. "All right," she said. She reached out and picked up the ribbon. There was nothing attached to it. No tag, no writing, just the ribbon itself, worn at the fold points, as ribbon gets worn when it has been handled many times. She set it back down where it had been. He watched her replace it. Then he settled back into his position with the quality of something that has seen what it needed to see. She sat there for a long time after that, The cold became a practical problem in the second week of November. Vermont November has a quality of cold that is different from the cold of October. October's cold is seasonal, expected, almost decorative, the cold of scarves and pumpkins and a furnace you are glad to have. November's cold in the hill country north of Brattleboro is something else. It comes in through the old houses, the way weather comes through old houses, not dramatically, not all at once, but persistently, finding the gaps in the insulation and the places where the weather stripping has given up, and the particular weak spot above the attic stair where the cold air from above and the relatively warmer air of the second floor create a draft that she had learned to expect every time she reached for the cord. The attic was not heated. The attic was not insulated above what the house had when it was built. Dr. Sloan had said the cat's joints were showing age. Eris stood at the bottom of the attic stair on a Saturday morning and thought about this. She did not want to insulate the attic. It was not on her list of things to do, and the list was already longer than she had anticipated when she bought the house. She did not want to bring the cat downstairs, because bringing the cat downstairs was a different category of decision than leaving food at the top of the stairs and putting a blanket in the corner, and she was not ready to make that category of decision. She thought about this with the honesty she tried to apply to her own reasoning. She was not ready to make that decision because making it meant she was keeping him. Keeping him meant she was responsible for him. Being responsible for him meant that if something happened to him, she would be the person to whom something had happened in consequence. She was 68 years old, and she had organized her life with considerable deliberateness around the principle of not being the person to whom things happen in consequence. This was not loneliness. This was architecture. The walls were there for reasons she had not forgotten, even if the original reasons were now some distance behind her. She stood at the bottom of the stair for a while longer. Then she called a contractor named Dale Burgess, whose name she had found in the Harwick Shoppers circular she had not thrown away, who came out on Monday and looked at the attic and quoted her a number for blown-in insulation that was higher than she wanted and lower than she had feared, and who appeared not to find a cat living in the space even slightly unusual, which she appreciated. "What's his name?" Dale Burgess asked, looking at the cat in the corner. "He doesn't have one," Eris said. "Before we continue, I want to take a moment to talk to you. YouTube has decided that our channel does not meet their requirements to be supported by their platform. We believe this is a mistake and we are fighting it. But right now, the only thing keeping Paws and Whispers alive is the love you have for these stories. If our videos have ever touched your heart, consider making a small donation. Even $1 helps us keep going. Just being here, watching and caring already means the world to us. The donation link is pinned in the comments below. Thank you." Dale Burgess looked at the cat for a moment. "He looks like a cinder to me," he said, and then he went back to measuring. She thought about that on the drive to pick up the additional food she had ordered from the veterinary office. She thought about how names worked, not as decoration, but as commitment. You named the things you intended to stay with. She drove past the hardware store. She drove back to it. She parked. She went inside and bought a ceramic water dish and a food bowl and a cat bed with washable fleece covering. She drove home. She put them at the top of the attic stair. She did not yet say the name aloud, was there? He had moved the ribbon. She noticed it 3 days later. She had gone up. She was going up every day now, a habit she had not decided to form but had formed, and the ribbon was no longer at the left end of the arrangement. It was in the center. The space where it had been was empty. The glove and the fabric and the frame were still in their positions, but the ribbon had moved 2 feet to the right. She stood in the attic and looked at this. She looked at him. He looked at her. She thought about what she knew. He could not have brought objects in. But the objects had been there when he arrived, when Marlowe Dren left, or when the house was cleared, and the family left these things behind, along with the steamer trunk and the mirror and the broken chair. Perhaps because they did not know their significance, perhaps because they did not care. And in the time since, in the months and perhaps years since, the house had stood empty, and the attic had held only him and whatever he had decided to do with himself in that space. He had been tending them. That was the word that came to her. Not arranging, tending. Like a garden, like a fire, like something that required attention to remain alive. She sat down on the floor. "Cinder," she said. He looked at her. It was the first time she had said it aloud. It did not feel like naming something she owned. It felt like using a name she had been told and had finally decided to use. He blinked once, slowly, as she said, "I'm going to find out about her." He did not respond to this in any observable way. He simply continued to exist in his corner with his paw near the rearranged ribbon, and the amber eyes and the quality of patience that she was beginning to understand was not passivity, but something closer to its opposite, a waiting that was active in a way she did not yet have the words for. Linden Grove Care Center was on Route 9 between Harwick and the interstate, a low brick building set back from the road with a parking lot that was half full on a Wednesday afternoon. Eris had called ahead and spoken to the activities coordinator, a woman named Shay, who had a fast, competent voice and who had said yes, of course, visitors were welcome, and that Marlo Dren was in good health and oriented, meaning she knew where she was and what time it was most days. Eris drove out on a Wednesday. She had a photograph. She had taken it that morning, the cat in his corner, sitting up straight in the gable light, the objects visible behind him. She had used her phone camera, and the image had come out clearly, the amber eyes and the grey fur and the arrangement at the wall. She had not decided what she was going to say. She had brought the photograph because it seemed like the kind of evidence that should be present if you were going to tell a person something like this. Marlo Dren was in a room on the south side of the building with a window that faced a small garden. She was seated in the chair beside the window when Eris came in. A woman in her mid-80s, Eris estimated, with silver hair in a loose braid over one shoulder and the particular stillness of a person who has been resident in their body long enough to have made peace with its requirements. She had been looking at the window garden, and she turned when Eris came in with the careful attention of someone who does not rush their perceptions. "You're from the house," Marlo Dren said. It was not a question. "I bought it in September," Eris said. She pulled the chair from the desk and sat down across from her because standing felt wrong in this room, with this woman, in this conversation. "Is it all right?" Marlo asked. The question was simple and genuine, the way old people sometimes ask about houses, the way they ask about children, wanting a real answer, not a reassuring one. "The weather stripping needs replacing," Eris said. "The attic insulation is inadequate." Something crossed Marlo Dren's face that might have been the beginning of a smile. "The attic," she said. "Yes," Eris said. She held out the photograph. Marlo took it. Her hands were steady, the hands of a woman who had been a teacher, Eris had been told, who had held chalk and papers and the attention of children for 30 years. She looked at the photograph. She did not look at it briefly and set it aside. She looked at it the way you look at something you were not sure you would ever see again. Her fingers tightened on the edges of the print. She did not speak for a long time. Then, without lifting her eyes from the photograph, she made a gesture, her right hand opening and closing the way a person calls a cat when a cat knows the call and is deciding whether to answer it. An old gesture, a private one, the muscle memory of years. She did not say his name. She pressed the photograph once against her chest, briefly, and then held it back out to Eris. Eris did not take it immediately. "You can keep it," she said. Marlo looked at her. The eyes were the pale blue of old weather, clear and level. "Tell me," she said. "Is he eating?" "Yes," Eris said. "Senior food, prescription wet food for his joints. He eats all of it." Marlo nodded once, the nod of someone receiving a report they have been waiting for. "He stayed," Eris said, and then, because it needed saying, he was there the whole time. The whole 2 years. The old woman's face did not crumple. She was past the age of crumpling at things. But something in her settled, a weight that had been suspended for 2 years, perhaps, quietly lowering. "I knew," she said, simply. "I kept telling them. He wouldn't leave. He's not—" She stopped. She looked back at the photograph. "He's always stayed." "The things in the corner," Eris said carefully. "The ribbon and the glove and the other things." Marlo looked up. "You found those? He seems to tend them." The old woman was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The ribbon was from the box I kept on the dresser. He used to sleep on it sometimes. The glove was my granddaughter's. She left it one visit and we never found it, and then it appeared in the attic one day, and I left it there." She touched the edge of the photograph. "He carries things. He always has. Since he was young, small things. He doesn't damage them. He just moves them. To somewhere specific. To somewhere he can watch them," Marlo said. Eris thought about the amber eyes and the corner and the 2 years of careful attention. "He's been watching them for you," she said. Marlo held the photograph for another moment. Then she set it, carefully, on the windowsill, facing toward the light. "Will you keep him?" she asked. It was the same directness Eris had used in asking Dr. Sloan how long. The honest question, the real one. "I insulated the attic," Eris said. "I bought him a ceramic dish. That's not the same as keeping him." "No," Eris said. "It isn't." She looked at the woman across from her, at the white braid and the weathered hands and the photograph on the windowsill. "I'm working on it." Marlo looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, He'll wait. It was said with complete confidence, not as comfort, as information. Eris drove home on Route 9 with the heat up and the grey November light coming through the windshield, and she thought about keeping things and what that required of you, and whether she had been wrong all these years about what the requirement actually was. The conflict with the landlord arrived in the second week of November in the form of a certified letter. She had not been renting. She owned the house. The letter was from the Homeowners Association, which she had not known existed because the realtor had not emphasized it, which she intended to address separately, informing her that the keeping of animals in the property was a matter requiring prior notification and approval, and that a neighbor had reported signs of an animal on the premises. She read the letter twice. Then she read the relevant clause in the HOA documents she found in the folder from the closing, which were in a manila envelope she had not opened since September. The clause was real. The notification requirement was procedural rather than prohibitive. She was required to disclose the presence of the animal and submit to a brief inspection. She was not required to remove the cat. She completed the notification form on the same afternoon, describing the animal accurately, age approximately 12 years, indoor only, currently residing in the attic space, and submitted it by certified mail. She also included, in a separate note that was not required but that she chose to write anyway, a brief account of the cat's situation, how long he had been in the house, the veterinary assessment, the previous owner's history. She did not know whether this was necessary. She had decided it was honest. She had also, on the same day, called Patience Oral, who had appeared at her door with zucchini bread in September and who had not pushed when the return of the favor had not been forthcoming. "It was you who reported the animal," Eris said. There was a pause. "I thought you should handle it officially," Patience said, without defensiveness. "I wasn't sure if you knew about the HOA." "I didn't," Eris said. "I should have told you in September," Patience said. "I'm sorry for that." Eris considered the call for a moment. "I named him Cinder," she said. Another pause. "Longer. After the color?" Patience said. "After the color," Eris confirmed. "That's a good name," Patience said. "I thought so," Eris said, and ended the call with the brief efficiency of a woman who has concluded the business at hand, but who found herself afterward sitting with the phone in her hand for slightly longer than the call required. December arrived in Maple Hollow the way it arrives in Vermont hill towns, not with drama, but with authority. One morning, the mountain ash in the back garden had its berries, and by afternoon, the first snow had covered them, and the yard became the particular white that makes everything that was there before seem like it belonged to a different chapter. The temperature dropped to the kind of cold that makes old houses speak in new registers, a ticking from the copper pipes, a pressure in the window frames, the whole structure contracting around its warmth with the focused self-preservation of something that has been through this before and intends to continue. Eris had lived in New England long enough to know how to prepare for a Vermont winter. She had weather stripping on order. She had the furnace serviced. She had stacked cordwood on the back porch that she did not strictly need, but that she had bought from a neighbor's son because the porch had clearly been built for cordwood and it seemed wrong to leave it empty. What she had not prepared for was Cinder coming downstairs. She had not heard it happen. She had been in the kitchen on a Thursday evening in the first week of December, making soup, the kind she made in winter, with dried beans and the heel of a Parmesan rind and whatever root vegetables she had, a process that took most of an afternoon and made the house smell like something that could accommodate the cold, when she turned from the stove and he was sitting in the doorway between the kitchen and the hall. Not dramatically, not like a cat who had been waiting for permission and finally received it. Simply present, the way he was always present, with the composed, unhurried quality of something that had decided this was the right time for a thing and saw no need to explain the decision. She looked at him. He looked at the soup pot. "It's not for cats," she said. He transferred his gaze to the food bowl on the floor in the corner, which she had moved from the attic to the kitchen 6 days ago without quite deciding to. He looked at the bowl. He looked at her. She opened the prescription wet food and put a portion in the bowl and set it back down. He walked to it with the same deliberateness he brought to everything and ate in the focused, thorough way of an animal that has spent enough time not knowing when the next meal was coming to take current meals seriously. She turned back to the stove. She was smiling. She did not notice this immediately. When she did, she left it alone. He did not return to the attic that night. He slept on the couch in the living room. She found him there in the morning, settled at one end with his back against the armrest and his eyes already open, watching her come down the stairs with the alert patience of something that has been awake for a while. She made coffee. He watched her make it. She sat in the chair across from him with the cup and the yellow legal pad on which she had recently been writing things that were not to-do lists, notes about what she had found out, observations about his behavior, a rough attempt to reconstruct the timeline of his residency in the attic. "I don't know what you want from the living room," she told him. He looked around the room as if taking inventory. The fieldstone fireplace she had not lit because she had not been sure about the chimney. The bookshelves she had unpacked but not organized. The single lamp she had put in the corner that gave the room a quality of light that was better than the overhead fixture, but still not quite right. He stood up. He walked across the couch. He stepped off the couch arm and onto the floor and walked to the fireplace and sat in front of it and looked at it. She watched. "The chimney sweep is coming on the 15th, she said. He looked at her. "2 weeks, she said. He settled his chin onto his paws. She had the chimney swept on the 15th. She lit the first fire that evening with the same methodical attention she brought to unfamiliar systems. Proper draft, dry wood, flue fully open. Cinder positioned himself 3 feet from the hearth, which seemed to her like a reasonable distance for an animal with good judgment, and watched the fire with the amber eyes that contained, in the firelight, every color she had not initially seen in them. She sat in the chair with her book. The fire moved. The snow outside pressed against the windows. She did not read very many pages. The HOA inspector arrived on a Friday morning in mid-December, a man named Paul Whitfield who carried a clipboard and wore the expression of someone who had expected this job to involve more authority than it turned out to. He came into the front hall and looked around, and Eris, who had made coffee specifically for this occasion because coffee is a disarmament strategy she had learned decades ago, offered him a cup before he could introduce the clipboard. He took the cup. Cinder appeared from the hallway and sat down 2 feet from the inspector's left boot and looked up at him with the amber eyes. Paul Whitfield looked down at the cat. Something in his clipboard hand relaxed. "Senior cat?" he said. 12, approximately, Eris said. "Possibly 13. He was living here already," Whitfield said. Not a question. He had read her notification letter. "For approximately 2.5 years before I arrived," Eris said. "He belonged to the previous owner. He stayed." Whitfield looked at the cat. Cinder looked at him. Then Cinder turned and walked back down the hallway toward the kitchen, which had the quality of a dismissal. Whitfield made a notation on his clipboard. "Everything looks in order," he said. He drank the coffee. "The notification's been filed. You're in compliance." "Thank you," Eris said. He left. She stood in the front hall and thought about the word compliance and how it was the right word technically, and also approximately 3 wrong words, and decided the distinction was hers to keep and not worth explaining to anyone who used clipboards. Tukiko. The package from Linden Grove arrived in the 3rd week of December. She had not expected a package. She had visited Marlowe Dren twice more since November, once with a progress report and once because she had been on Route 9 for hardware store purposes and had found herself turning into the parking lot before she had entirely decided to. The visits were not long. They did not require to be long. Marlowe was a woman who communicated accurately and without excess, which was a quality Eris recognized and appreciated. They talked about Cinder. They talked, on the second visit, about the house. Marlowe described rooms that Eris had not yet fully inhabited, the way a person describes a house they know in their bones, from inside the knowledge rather than from outside it. She described the morning light in the back bedroom and the way the cellar door stuck in wet weather and the particular sound the 3rd stair made, which Eris had already noted and had not yet fixed. The package contained a photograph and a note. The photograph was of Marlowe and a younger Cinder. He was thinner in the face, brighter in the fur, with the same amber eyes, but with the particular intensity that young eyes carry before they have settled into their final quality. He was sitting on a blue ribbon on a dresser. Marlowe's hand was in the frame at the edge, one finger extended, which he was pressing his forehead against. The note said, "His full name is Cinder Bright. I called him Cinder." He came from the Harwich shelter when he was about 2 years old. He has always moved things to safe places. It is not mischief. He takes care of what he loves. Thank you for writing to tell me about the dish. The ceramic was always his preference. He does not care for plastic. Eris read the note twice. She sat down on the couch, which she had not intended to do, and sat there for a while with the photograph in her hand and the note on her knee. Cinder came from the kitchen doorway and jumped onto the couch beside her, the first time he had done this, and sat close to her right side, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him through her cardigan sleeve. She showed him the photograph. He looked at it. His nose moved forward, barely, to touch the edge of the print. Then he settled back. She put the photograph on the side table where she would see it. Outside, the December light had gone to 4 o'clock grey, the specific colour of a Vermont afternoon 2 days before the solstice, when the dark comes in like a tide and makes the lit windows of houses look like something worth having. She turned the lamp on. He did not move from his position beside her, nor grow. Christmas passed quietly. She had been invited to her son David's house in Burlington, which she had declined, citing the drive on mountain roads in December, which was a real consideration and also not the complete explanation. David had called on Christmas morning, and she had talked to him for 40 minutes, which was longer than their usual calls, and had told him about the cat, and David had said, "You have a cat now?" with the particular inflection of adult children who are pleased by evidence that their parents are engaged with something. "I appear to," she said. "What's his name?" "Cinder." "Good name," David said, which was the same thing Patience Orrell had said, and she found herself thinking that perhaps the name was simply correct in a way that bypassed opinion. After the call, she made herself a proper Christmas dinner, not an elaborate one, but a real one, with a small roasted chicken and vegetables and a pie she had made from the last of the frozen Concord peaches she had brought from the old apartment in a cooler, because she had grown those peaches herself on the apartment's south-facing balcony, and she was not going to throw them out. She ate at the kitchen table, which she had not done before. She had been eating at the counter, which was a habit of efficiency, but the table had a chair that looked at the window, and the window looked at the snowy yard, and on a day in December that was about being present in a place, the counter seemed wrong. Cinder ate his dinner beside her and then jumped onto the empty chair across the table and sat there watching her eat with the focused interest of an animal who has no food left of his own, but finds the observation of others eating genuinely engaging rather than frustrating. "You are not getting chicken," she told him. He continued to observe with the expression of someone who has not requested chicken and does not know why you have raised the topic. She gave him a small piece of chicken. He ate it with great dignity. "That doesn't set a precedent," she said. He began to clean his face with his paw. She sat back in her chair and looked out at the snowy yard and the bare mountain ash with its orange berry clusters already half buried, and the late afternoon light making the whole yard the color of old cream, and she thought that this was not a bad Christmas. She thought this without the prior qualification she had developed for good things, the reaching for the caveat, the noting of what was absent, which was something she had been doing since her husband had died 12 years ago, and which she had come to believe was simply how she thought. Not a choice, but a condition. It occurred to her, with the particular clarity of a quiet December kitchen, that it might have been a choice after all. B. The crisis came in January. She had known, in the practical, prepared part of herself, that Cinder's age was a matter requiring attention. Dr. Sloane had been clear about this at the first visit, the joints, the age, the years of inadequate nutrition in the attic. He had scheduled a follow-up for December, which had gone satisfactorily, and a second follow-up for February. She had the veterinary calendar on the kitchen bulletin board, the new one she had hung next to the yellow legal pad, and the photograph from Marlowe. On a Tuesday morning in the second week of January, she came downstairs to find him in the kitchen, but wrong. She knew immediately that something was wrong in the specific way that you know with animals when you have been paying sufficient attention, not a dramatic wrongness, not a collapsed, gasping wrongness, but the quieter signal of an animal that is not organizing itself the way it usually does. He was standing in the middle of the kitchen floor instead of sitting. He was standing in the careful, concentrated way of something that is managing discomfort and not entirely succeeding. His breathing was slightly shallow. He had not touched the food in the bowl. She put her hand near him. He did not move toward it. He did not move away. He simply stood. She got her coat and her keys. Dr. Sloane's office was not open until 8. She drove to Harwick and sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes with the car running and Cinder in the carrier on the back seat and the radio off, because the radio would have been wrong in the specific quality of silence that the situation required. She did not think about what she would do if something was seriously wrong. She was aware of the thought waiting behind the others, the one about what it would cost her and whether she had been right to let herself be in the position to have it cost her, but she did not let it forward. There was nothing useful in it right now. Right now, she was in a parking lot with a cat in a carrier, and in 40 minutes there would be a veterinarian, and that was the extent of what was relevant. Dr. Sloane took the blood work and the X-ray and came back 30 minutes later with the expression of a man delivering a verdict that is neither catastrophic nor trivial. "Kidney values are elevated," he said. "Not in crisis, but enough to be concerned about. We need to start a kidney support diet immediately. Increased hydration, wet food predominantly, or water added to the dry. He should also have IV fluids today to support the kidneys while they're under stress." He set the chart down. "This is manageable, Eris, but it requires consistent care." She nodded. She was making notes on the back of a receipt she had found in her coat pocket, which was the only paper available, in the precise handwriting she used for things that needed to be exactly right. "If he had been in this house another year without medical attention," she said. "Yes," Dr. Sloane said, without elaborating. She drove home with the adjusted diet instructions and a bag of renal support wet food, and the understanding that Cinder now required twice daily meals, measured portions, and a water fountain that encouraged continuous hydration. She purchased the water fountain from the Pet Supply website that evening. She cleared a space on the kitchen counter for it. She read the assembly instructions. She called Patience Oral. This was not something she had done before, calling Patience specifically for something she needed. She had spoken to her twice since the first zucchini bread, once on the phone about the HOA and once briefly in the driveway. But Patience was the person she knew in Maple Hollow who was most likely to be familiar with the practical geography of things, and what she needed was practical. "If I have to be out for a full day," she said, "is there someone reliable who could come in and give the cat his afternoon meal? I have a protocol now. It is written down clearly." Patience did not make this into more than it was. "I can do it," she said. "Just show me the protocol." "You don't have to—" "I know I don't," Patience said. "I'll come Saturday morning and you can show me." Eris paused. "Thank you," she said. "He's going to be all right?" Patience asked. "The vet says it's manageable," Eris said. "That's good." A brief pause. "Will you come for coffee on Saturday before you show me the protocol?" Eris looked across the kitchen at Cinder, who was at the new water fountain, investigating it with the methodical attention he brought to new objects. Nose forward, then back, then forward again. He pressed the edge with his paw. Water moved. He watched it. "Yes," she said. "I'll come for coffee." She hung up and watched Cinder figure out the fountain, and when he lowered his head and began to drink from it with the deep, continuous drinking of a dehydrated animal encountering exactly the right thing, she felt something move in her chest that she had not felt in a long time. Not sentiment, not the soft, warm feeling that people describe with the word heartwarming, which she had always found imprecise. Something closer to relief, the specific relief of having arrived correctly in a place where the thing that needed doing was being done. There was a night in late January when he did not come back. She had been aware over the previous weeks that he occasionally went upstairs. Not to the attic stair she had stopped using as a daily route, and he had followed her lead, but to the second floor, to the upstairs hallway, and sometimes to the doorway of the second bedroom that she had been using as a study but had not yet furnished properly, which meant it contained a desk and a lamp, and a great many boxes she had not finished unpacking. She did not follow him when he went up there. He always came back down by morning. On this night, he did not. She woke at 2:20. She had stopped expecting the old timing, but old habits, and registered the absence. He was not at the foot of the bed where he had taken to sleeping. He was not in the hallway. She went upstairs and found him in the second bedroom, sitting in the center of the empty floor, not near the desk or the boxes, in the precise center of the space, looking at the far wall. She stood in the doorway. He did not turn. She looked at the wall. There was nothing on it. She had not hung anything in this room because she had not yet decided what this room was going to be, whether to set it up properly as a study or convert it to a guest room or leave it as the intermediate space it had been since September. He sat there. She stood in the doorway. She thought about Marlowe's note. He takes care of what he loves. She went back to bed and lay awake for a while, thinking about the room and the wall and what it might be that a cat would sit in an empty room looking at a wall and wait for. Not a mouse behind the baseboard. He was not in the alert position of an animal tracking something. He was in the position of an animal keeping vigil. The difference, she had learned, was in the quality of the stillness. In the morning, she bought a print she had been considering for 6 months, but had not committed to, a landscape, a Vermont hillside in early spring, birches and the first green of the season against the last of the snow, and she hung it on the wall of the second bedroom. She went down for her coffee. At 9 o'clock, she heard him come down the stairs. He walked into the kitchen and ate his morning meal and drank from the fountain, and then came and sat in the doorway of the kitchen and looked at her. "Better," she said. He went to his place by the window. She had not been sure in September what she was doing in Maple Hollow. She had told herself, "The numbers work. The calculation is correct. This is efficient." She had organized her removal from the world of connection as a practical matter rather than an emotional one, because practical matters have solutions and emotional ones have only management. She was sitting in her kitchen in January with the snow outside and the cat by the window and the photograph of Marlowe on the bulletin board and Patience Orrell's phone number in her yellow legal pad, and she was thinking that she had been efficient about the wrong things. This was not a pleasant thought, but it was a clear one, and she had always preferred clear thoughts to comfortable ones, which was, she supposed, one quality she was glad not to have organized away. February. Cinder's kidney values at the mid-month recheck had stabilized. Not reversed. Kidneys do not reverse at 12 years, but stabilized, which was the word Dr. Sloan used with the specific satisfaction of a veterinarian whose treatment plan has done what it was designed to do. Eris added this to her notes on the legal pad, which had ceased to be a to-do list and had become something closer to a log. She did not examine this transformation too closely. It was what it was. She had begun, in February, to do something she had not done since her husband was alive. She had been a gardener. Not a casual one, a real one, the kind who reads seed catalogues in January and maintains a cold frame and knows the difference between a biennial and a perennial, not just in theory, but in the specific practiced way of someone who has put both in the ground. She had stopped when she moved to the Concord apartment because there was no garden, and she had told herself, well, that's finished. A reasonable conclusion. She had not thought of it as a loss. She had categorized it as a change of circumstances and moved on. The back garden of the house on Birch Street had gone to seed in a way she had called restful in September and had continued to call restful in October and November and December, but which in February she was beginning to call, with more accuracy, neglected. She ordered a seed catalogue. It arrived on a Thursday, and she sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and read it from the beginning, which was how she had always read seed catalogues, because the plant she needed was sometimes in a category she would not have thought to look in, and you only found it by going page by page. Cinder jumped onto the table and lay across the lower third of the catalogue with the calm confidence of something that knows it is too warm and pleasant to be moved. "I'm reading that," she said. He adjusted slightly so that approximately 40% of the catalogue was visible. This was a compromise she understood. She accepted it. She ordered tomatoes and 2 kinds of kale and the climbing nasturtiums she had always grown along fences and a variety of zinnia she had been curious about for 3 years but had not had a garden for. She ordered 4 pounds of wildflower seed mix for the area of the back garden near the mountain ash, because that section would take too long to cultivate properly this first year, and the wildflowers would give the pollinators something while she got the beds in order. She filled out the order form at the kitchen table with the cat lying across the catalogue and the lamp making a circle of warmth in the February kitchen, and she felt something she recognized but had not felt in some time: anticipation. The specific, calibrated anticipation of a gardener in winter, holding the future of a garden in the form of a printed list. It was not a large feeling. It was a precise one. It was enough. March came in slowly, the way March arrives in Vermont, not suddenly warm, not winter-breaking, but with a quality of light that had not been there in February. A few degrees higher, the angle of the sun shifting far enough to matter, the snow on the south-facing garden bed pulling back an inch at the edges to reveal the brown soil underneath. Mud season was still a week away, which meant the ground was frozen below but no longer impenetrable at the surface, and she could stand in the back garden and press her finger into the edge of the thawing bed and feel the specific resistance of earth that is beginning to consider changing its state. She did this on a Thursday morning, because Thursday mornings were her garden planning mornings now. She was wearing her boots and her old canvas jacket, the one she had gardened in for 15 years and which had a pocket on the left side where she had always kept her pruning knife. The knife was still there. She had not unpacked it deliberately. It had simply been in the pocket when she found the jacket in November, and she had left it where it was because moving it would have meant deciding something about the knife, and she had not been ready to decide. She stood in the garden and looked at the beds. Behind her, from the back porch, there was a soft sound. She turned. Cinder was sitting on the top step of the back porch. He had come outside. He had not been outside since she had brought him to the vet in the fall. She had kept the back door to the porch accessible to him since December, a screen door that he had investigated once and then apparently decided was not worth the cold. But the morning was warmer, and the door was open. And he was sitting on the top step in the thin March sunlight, with his face turned toward the light at the angle cats use to absorb warmth, which is directly into the source, eyes half closed. She watched him for a moment. He did not look like a cat that had spent 2.5 years in an attic. He looked like a cat that had decided the morning was acceptable. She turned back to the garden. She walked to the mountain ash at the back corner. The orange berries from the fall had been consumed by birds or had fallen, and the bare branches held the quality of something that would be ready to leaf out in April if the temperature held. She checked the rose canes along the back fence which needed cutting back, and the remnant stalks of what appeared to have been a substantial bed of black-eyed Susans, which she would not cut yet, because the hollow stalks were shelter for overwintering insects, and she had always believed in the obligations of late winter. Cinder came down the porch steps. He did it slowly and with the careful management of stairs that older cats apply, not labored, not distressed, but deliberate, each step a considered proposition. He reached the bottom step and sat there for a moment, looking at the garden with the specific attention he brought to unfamiliar spaces. Then he walked toward her, not across the garden, along the edge of it, where the flagstone path ran from the porch to the garden beds. He stayed on the path. He walked to the bed she was examining and sat at the edge of the stone and looked at the exposed soil. She crouched down beside him. He sniffed the air above the soil with the focused, comprehensive attention that cats bring to scent in the way that humans bring to information, reading it, cataloguing it, placing it in relation to everything else they know. "Worms soon," she said. "When the ground thaws completely." He looked at her. "You are not allowed to dig in the beds," she told him. He looked back at the soil with the expression of a creature that has not agreed to any such restriction. She stayed crouched beside him for a while, the two of them looking at the garden together in the thin March sunlight, and it seemed to her that this was the kind of moment that does not announce itself as significant, but that you recognize later when you're trying to account for the point at which one kind of life ended and a different kind began. She visited Marlowe again in the 3rd week of March. She had been going once a month, regularly, without making a formal arrangement out of it. She would call ahead, confirm Marlowe was well, drive out on a weekday morning. It had become a pattern the way patterns become, through repetition, until the day she realized she had not scheduled this visit and had simply gotten in the car. She brought the photograph she had taken that morning, Cinder on the back porch step in the March sunlight. Ears forward, face turned to the light, Marlowe took the photograph and looked at it for a long time. "He's outside," she said. "The back porch," Eris said. "He's been going out in the mornings when it's warm enough. The old woman's face, looking at the photograph, had the quality of something released. Not emotion performing itself for the observer, something quieter than that. The private face of a person receiving news they have been carrying, the not knowing of, for a long time. He used to sit in the back garden in the morning, Marlowe said, on the flagstone path, in the sun. That's exactly where he goes, Eris said. Marlowe set the photograph on the windowsill beside the first one. She looked at the two photographs together for a moment, the young cat on the blue ribbon on the dresser and the old cat on the porch step in the March light. Then she looked at Eris. You said in September you were working on keeping him, she said. Yes, Eris said. Have you worked it out? Eris thought about the ceramic dish and the seed catalogue and the water fountain and the landscape print on the second bedroom wall and the telephone number in the yellow legal pad and the gardening knife in the pocket of her canvas jacket. I think I have, she said. Marlowe nodded once. Then she said, with the directness that Eris had come to recognize as the form her warmth took. Good. He deserved someone like you. Eris looked at her. I'm not sure what you mean. Someone who needed time, Marlowe said simply. He's always been patient. He just needed a person with enough patience to meet him. Eris was quiet for a moment. He takes care of what he loves, she said. She was quoting Marlowe's own note back to her, and Marlowe recognized it. Yes, the old woman said. I think he was taking care of the things you left in the attic. Eris paused. I think he arranged them so they wouldn't get lost. Marlowe looked out the window at the small garden, where the early crocuses had pushed through the care centre's maintained beds, purple and white against the last grey patches of lawn. I used to think he understood more than was reasonable, she said. My daughter thought I was being sentimental. You weren't, Eris said. Marlowe turned from the window. No, she said. I don't think I was. They sat together for a while after that, in the particular quiet of two women who have arrived at an understanding without having had to argue for it. CTA, before we continue, I want to take a moment to talk to you. These stories exist because of this community, because of you. And right now, YouTube has denied our monetization, which means the only thing keeping Paws and Whispers alive is the love you have for these stories. If our videos have ever made you feel something, if they've brought you comfort, joy, or just a moment of peace, consider making a small donation. Even the minimum makes a huge difference to us. The link is pinned in the comments below. Thank you for being here. End CTA. April came to Maple Hollow slowly, and then all at once, the way Vermont spring always does, a week of mud and brown, and the particular drab that follows winter's withdrawal, and then a morning when the forsythia along the back fence ignited yellow, and the air smelled of the specific cold sweetness that belongs only to new growth, and the world rearranged itself into a different color. She was in the garden on a Saturday morning, in the second week of April, on her knees in the first bed, turning the soil with the old hand fork she had brought from Concord, working in the compost she had started in December, in the bin she had built from cedar boards in the back corner. The soil was dark and workable, the kind of soil that has rested under snow for a season and come out the other side improved by it. She pressed her hand flat against it and felt the cold and the life in it simultaneously, which was what spring soil felt like, exactly. Cinder was on the flagstone path, which had become his designated morning territory. He had learned over the past 3 weeks that the path was solid and the beds were not meant for him, and he kept the agreement with a consistency that she found, honestly, more reliable than she had expected. He sat at the edge of the path and watched her work with the focused attention he brought to everything she did in the garden, which she had decided was genuine interest rather than performance, because he was not a cat who performed. Patience. Aurel came through the side gate with 2 cups of coffee from the diner on the main road, which she had taken to bringing on Saturday mornings since February in a development that had begun with the loan of a winter squash and had evolved unremarkably into a habit that neither of them had formalized or needed to. The forsythia is beautiful, Patience said, handing over the coffee and looking at the yellow blaze along the fence. I didn't plant it, Eris said, but I'm glad of it. Patience sat on the garden bench, another February edition, ordered from a catalogue, cedar, with the specific quality of a garden bench that is meant to be used rather than decorative. She looked at Cinder on the flagstone path. He's good in the garden, she said. He keeps the agreement, Eris said. What agreement? He stays on the path. I don't disturb his sunning spot on the back porch step. Patience considered this. That's a very reasonable arrangement. He's a reasonable animal, Eris said. She turned another row of soil. The hand fork went in clean and turned the earth up dark and rich, and she broke the clumps with her fingers the way she had always done, by hand, because tools are efficient, but hands know soil in a different way. She had ordered the tomato seedlings from a nursery in Harwick, and they were coming the following weekend, and she had marked the beds with the thin bamboo stakes she had bought in March. 4 varieties, 2 heirlooms, staked for the spots with the most direct afternoon sun. She had measured the sun over 2 weeks before deciding on the placement, which was the kind of meticulous approach to a problem that David, on the phone last month, had called very you, meaning it affectionately. She had been surprised still to find it affectionate. She sat back on her heels and drank the coffee, which was from the diner and therefore too strong by most standards and exactly right by hers, and she looked at the garden and what it was becoming. Not a finished thing. It would not be finished this year. That was not how first-year gardens went. The wildflower section in the back would be uncertain until summer. The bed along the north fence would need a second season to establish. But the bones were visible, and the bones were good, and the spring light on the new-turned soil had the quality of something that was moving in the right direction. Cinder stood up from the flagstone path. He stretched, the full-body extension that cats perform after stillness, back arched, front paws reaching, a long shudder of waking. Then he walked along the path toward her. He sat down on the flagstone directly beside her knee. He looked at the soil. He looked at her. He blinked once, slowly. She put her hand down, and he pressed the side of his head against her palm once, briefly, with the contained precision that was his version of a gesture other cats made more freely. Then he straightened. He looked at the forsythia along the fence. He looked at the mountain ash, which had come into its first tight leaves of the season, green and new, the orange berries of the fall entirely gone, the tree entirely itself in this new form. He sat beside her in the April morning, and he looked at the garden that was becoming a garden, and he was, she thought, watching him, exactly where he had decided to be. Not waiting, not keeping vigil, simply present, in the particular quality of presence that is the opposite of waiting, which was something she understood now, in the specific and hard-earned way that understanding comes when you have come to it from the other direction. She went up to the attic one more time. On a Sunday afternoon in late April, with the spring light coming through the gable window at the angle it had first come through when she was there with the flashlight in October, and everything was different, she went up and she stood in the center of the space where she could stand upright, and she looked at the corner. The objects were still there. She had not moved them. She had not been sure it was her place to move them. The blue ribbon, the folded floral fabric, the green glove, the empty picture frame propped against the wall, facing out. She sat down on the floor. The attic smelled different in April than it had in October. The cedar and dust were the same, but there was new air in it now from the better sealed vents, and the quality of light through the gable was warmer. The steamer trunk was still there, the mirror face down on the sawhorses. She had not opened the trunk. She had not turned the mirror over. Those were decisions for another time, or perhaps for never. Some things are not hers to open. She looked at the objects. She thought about Marlowe on the dresser, the blue ribbon under a young cat's body. She thought about the green glove, found somewhere in the house, carried up. She thought about the years the house stood empty, and what it is to tend a thing in the absence of the person the thing belongs to. She did not know why an animal does what he does. She did not need to know. She had, over the 7 months she had been in this house, learned to work with what was observable rather than with what was explainable, and what was observable was this. A cat had spent years keeping careful attention on the things that mattered to the person who loved him, in the only way he knew how, in the only place he knew. That was the whole of it. She stayed in the attic for a while, then she came downstairs. He was in the kitchen when she came down, at the water fountain, drinking in the steady way he had adopted once his kidneys had stabilized and water had become a reliable feature of his life. He drank, and then he looked at her, and then he walked past her to the back door, which he had left open to the porch in the afternoon warmth. She followed him out. He went down the porch steps, carefully, one at a time, with the deliberate management of a 12-year-old body that has learned to do most things correctly if given adequate time, and he walked along the flagstone path to his spot near the mountain ash. He turned around once in the way cats turn before settling and lowered himself to the warm stone. He put his chin on his paws. The forsythia along the fence had begun to go over, the yellow softening toward green as April moved into the half of itself that is closer to May. The tomato stakes marked out the beds in their even rows. The wildflower section showed the first thin threads of green at the soil surface, not yet identifiable but present, going toward what they would be. The afternoon light came through the mountain ash and made small moving shadows on the flagstone. Cinder watched the light move. His tail, hanging over the edge of the path, was entirely still.